Cato dug up his wife Aziza's corpse from the grave and brought it home. This man committed such a shameful act with his dead wife's body that everyone who saw it trembled to the depths of their souls. My friends, this is a somewhat secret story, so make sure you watch it till the end, so that you can fully understand it. I was abroad in another African country at that time when I got the news that my wife Aziza had died. As soon as I heard this news, I immediately came back from abroad, but by then my wife had already been buried. That night, my heart longed for one last moment of intimacy with my wife. With this intention, I left for the cemetery in the darkness of night and started digging up my wife's grave. But as soon as I dug up my wife's grave, I burst into tears, and I took my wife into my arms, because, well, let me explain it to you from the beginning. I work in a big multinational company in another African city, let's call it Nairobi. That day, too, I had spoken to my wife Aziza in the morning for about an hour, and this was my daily routine. I would talk to her, and then talk to her again in the evening as much as I wanted, and half the night would pass while we kept talking. That day she was completely fine when we had our long conversation, but I did not know that would be our last conversation. Against my usual routine, I received her call in the afternoon, but I could not attend to it because at my workplace, there was a strict ban on attending calls or using the phone during work hours. Despite this, for some unknown reason, my heart was racing. I felt helpless, kept glancing toward my cell phone again and again, wishing I could talk to her right away who knew what she wanted to tell me. But there were only a few hours left till my work was over, and I planned to speak to her in detail afterward. I knew she might be annoyed, but I also knew how to console her. When, after finishing work in the evening, I reached my living quarters and was unlocking the door, I received another call. A smile came to my lips, and I thought, Aziza's always been too impatient. That's been her habit from the start. I answered the call with a smile, pressing the phone to my ear, saying, Aziza, I don't know when your impatience will end. One day it's going to take my life. But on the other end, there was complete silence. I said, Hello, Aziza, what happened, my love? Is everything okay? I asked tenderly. Just then, I recognized the voice of my Aunt Maisie on the phone, and my feet froze right there. It was Aunt Maisie's voice on Aziza's phone. I was stunned and asked in alarm, Where is Aziza? Where is she? Suddenly my aunt began to cry. My heart started pounding heavily, and inwardly, I prayed that everything was all right. This had never happened before Aziza's phone being with someone else. Son, I have terrible news, Aunt Maisie sobbed. Aziza has returned to our Creator. I felt as though the ground slipped from under my feet, and the ceiling had fallen on me. I repeated, What are you saying, Aunt? I thought maybe I had misheard, because how could this be? I had just spoken to Aziza in the morning, and she was absolutely fine. How could she leave me by evening? This cannot be. Son Cato, she has left you? Aunt Maisie told me. At noon, she had gone to the market to shop when her car had an accident, and she passed away on the spot. Then I recalled that Aziza had told me in the morning that she would go shopping in the afternoon. I sank down there on the floor, crying inconsolably. The pain of being far from home is a peculiar kind of sorrow. There is no one there to support you. And this was the greatest grief of my life, losing the love of my life. After going through so many difficulties to be with her, I wanted at all costs to see her face one last time. However, by the time I managed to get leave and the ticket, a day's delay was unavoidable, and Aziza had already been buried. I received her final photo. I wept bitterly when I saw it. She was wrapped in a burial shroud, my doll made of wax, sleeping so deeply without a care. It felt as though my heart would burst from the intensity of the pain. I was crying like a madman at the sight of that picture. I hadn't even embraced her for the last time, and she had left me. What a cruel twist of fate. Aside from her, I had no one in the world. When I reached home, my house was silent and deserted, as if no one had lived there for ages. Every wall and corner carried Aziza's memories like a snake's bite. I arrived in the evening and spent the entire night weeping. That evening, Aunt Maisie and my cousin came to meet me and brought some food along, but I did not even touch it. They told me that Aziza had suffered a severe head injury, causing her to pass away on the spot. The wreckage of her car in my garage testified to the tragedy, completely crushed and ruined. I was so overcome with grief that I could not figure out how to keep living without Aziza. Which pain was I supposed to grieve first? The sorrow of being far away in another country and losing her forever, the pain of losing her only 2 years into our marriage, or the cruel nature of her terrible death. For many days, I did not leave the house at all. Her memory would come slithering back like a snake, biting me over and over. I saw her everywhere. Every object reminded me of her, and I would cry out for her like a madman. I could smell her fragrance in everything. That same fragrance that emanated from her being seemed to come from everywhere, overpowering my emotions. I felt like she was calling me, wanting to meet me, and even now she longed for my nearness. I felt like dying, but then I would just keep it all inside me with a sad little smile. In 2 years, I had worked so hard that I had transformed my life. I started with nothing, and I gained everything, yet in spite of that, I had lost Aziza. I could not erase her memory from my heart. I wanted to set everything on fire. One morning, I left the house early and went straight to Aziza's grave. That mound of dirt seemed to mock my helplessness, as if it were laughing at me, saying, "Now you come. What is the point of coming now? You have lost her. You will never have her again. Sit here on this mound of dirt and weep the rest of your life. This is your destiny." I clung to her grave and began to cry so loudly that people passing by trembled and stared at me. I had become a spectacle to them. I had nothing left, no alternative. And I had lost that as well. For some reason, my heart wished the grave would split open and let me go inside, so I could see how my Aziza lay sleeping. I kept pounding my fists on the grave, but it did not open, and I did not see Aziza. Eventually, some people who passed by pitied me and helped me away from the cemetery, and I returned home. In the street, I saw my neighbor, Faraji, standing there. He looked at me once, then again, then over and over, just staring. His eyes held a strange wonder, as if he were looking at me with astonishment. I thought, is there some show going on that he's staring at me so intently? Annoyance flared up in me. I wanted to go and berate him, but then I remembered he was my neighbor, older than me, and I could not be rude. So I went home quietly. All day, my neighbor Faraji would deliver milk to the people in our neighborhood. Early in the morning, he would leave milk at our doorstep, exactly as the routine had been when Aziza was alive. I would just pick it up from the door. I was not cooking at home. Aunt Mezzi, or sometimes my cousin, would send over food. Now I was surprised by the behavior of these relatives, because they had so disliked Aziza that they never once spoke kindly to her, and yet suddenly, after her death, they were acting so regretful and concerned, coming frequently to my house. One evening, I frankly told my cousin what I felt, that I did not need them coming over, and I had no space in my heart for such relationships. Those who had disliked my Aziza were my enemies, and I was well aware of the malice in their hearts. But despite my anger, they kept visiting my house. Even my aunt began cleaning my home for me. She tried to console me, praising Aziza, remembering stories of how Aziza had lived so lonely and alone without me. She had never bothered to socialize with the neighbors, but she was always polite to everyone, so people liked her. Even the aunt who once hated Aziza was now praising her. I had lost a diamond while I was out searching for money. I had lost the most precious treasure of my life. After that, my life became lonely and desolate. My friend Juma, formerly Yasir, began urging me to get out of the house, to see the outside world so that I might find some relief from this grief. Actually, I was planning to leave again after a month, but now I felt so suffocated here that I wanted to catch the very next flight out. Still, I wanted at least to complete the traditional 40-day mourning for my wife, since I could not even attend her funeral. This final ritual, at least, I wanted to witness for my beloved wife. On Juma's insistence, I would go out with him in the evenings, but even there, I would sit silently. He never saw me smile or joke about anything. And still, one thing continued to puzzle me: Faraji's gaze. He kept staring at me steadily. He was testing my patience. One night 20 days after Aziza's death, I was reading a book when I came across a passage that said, 40 days after burial, only the skull remains, and everything else decays. Even the skeleton dissolves into dust. My heart pounded. I closed the book and set it aside. Tears welled up again. I could see her white, wax-like body right before my eyes, which I hadn't even properly looked at. I had only been married to her for a month before leaving for that African multinational job. Aziza also wanted me to do this. She said you get such opportunities only rarely. And we had our whole lives to spend together. Build our future now, she had said. Only for a few days should we endure this separation, so I went. Thinking of it all, my eyes burned with tears, my heart pounded. I was lying on the same bed where we had spent so many beautiful moments. Remembering each of those moments, I writhed in her memory. Her long hair, her round, beautiful eyes, her rose-petal lips, and the shape of her face, she was a masterpiece. Touching her body felt like everything else in the world faded. Thinking of all this, I lost control over myself. My heartbeat was so fast that my palms were sweating. Restless, I sat up. My heart longed to have her in front of me, to hold her close, to breathe in her scent, to leave the touch of my lips upon hers, and to gaze into her beautiful eyes until I went mad. But deep inside, I knew she was now forever out of my reach. If only I had been here, I could have embraced her one last time, talked about our love one last time, and then said my final goodbye. Then maybe this grief would not have been so overwhelming. Now it was crippling. I took her picture down from the wall and pressed it to my chest. In it, she was wearing a black African wrap, and her fair, milky arms were stirring my emotions intensely. I held it tightly to my chest, and my heart pounded wildly. I kissed every inch of the photo. I want to see you one last time. I can't just say goodbye to you like this. If I must do anything to fulfill this wish, I will do it. This idea wrapped itself around my mind. Without fully realizing what I was doing or considering the consequences, I put down her picture, put on my shoes, and left. I knew that what I was about to do might bring me disgrace. People would spit on me. Maybe I still wouldn't find Aziza, but despite all that, I wanted to carry out my wish. My feet were involuntarily moving toward the cemetery where Aziza was sleeping, oblivious to the world, turned away from me. Once upon a time, if I called her, she would come running and hide in my arms. Today, I kept calling her over and over, but she stayed so far away she would not come to me. My body was shaking from the intensity of my emotions. Tears kept filling my eyes. My heart was pounding so hard that I could neither feel the weather nor any fear. My focus was only on seeing Aziza by any means, meeting her, talking to her, clinging to her, and fulfilling my every desire. It was late at night, and the entire area was dark and desolate. Fear was everywhere. In the distance, I could hear dogs barking. Lost in my thoughts, I walked quickly toward the graveyard. When I reached it, I went straight to Aziza's grave, where absolute darkness reigned, and I laid my head on her grave and began to cry. Aziza, you left me. Why did you punish me so severely? I just want to see you one last time, to say goodbye, so that maybe I can forget you. Otherwise, your memory will drive me insane. Being separated from you is destroying me inside. Maybe you'll be angry with me for doing what I'm about to do, but please forgive me, I'm helpless. I can't live without you. After saying this, I got up and began digging up Aziza's grave. I felt no fear of jinn or anything else. I didn't care if anyone saw me. I also knew that digging up a grave violated both moral and spiritual law, that it was a grave sin. But I kept on digging her grave, unconcerned about anything. If anyone had seen me at that moment, they would have been terrified of my madness. Yet I was so lost in my resolve that I feared nothing. After about 2 long hours of effort, I finally dug down to Aziza's coffin. Upon seeing that coffin, I wept again, because this box contained my love, the wife of my heart, sleeping there forever. I shone a small flashlight over the coffin. It still looked new and in good condition. I noticed no foul odor, which gave me courage. I sat next to the coffin. It felt as though Aziza might open it at any moment, stretch out her arms to me, and say, "Kato, you've come for me. You've come to see me." And I would embrace her, replying, "Yes, Aziza, your Kato is here and will never leave you again." But she was silent. The coffin was still closed. I began to open the coffin. The tears in my eyes blurred my vision. My heart was racing. There, wrapped in white cloth, lay the woman who once called me. I reached out my arms to lift her onto my chest. Her entire body, even her face, was wrapped in white cloth, and she was so stiff that I felt as though I were holding a stone wall. But I clung to her and pressed her to my heart, crying, "Forgive me, I couldn't come to you. I didn't see you one last time. Now I'm here to see you and say goodbye. Maybe our next meeting will be on the last day. I'm sorry. With trembling hands, I tried to remove the cloth from her face. I believed she was waiting for me with a smile, that she would look into my eyes and say, "Kato, your eyes are the most beautiful in the world, and the feelings in them belong only to me." But perhaps none of this was to be. The moment I lifted the cloth from her face, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. I let go involuntarily and stumbled backward a couple of steps. For the first time, a fierce fear seized me. I shuddered. Staring with horror, it seemed as if she was also staring back at me with wide-open eyes. I had never imagined witnessing such a sight. I retreated from the grave in a panic. Aziza and I had met back in university, and before we knew it, we had fallen in love. My aunt, Aunt Mezi, had raised me after my parents died when I was a child. Though my father left me a decent inheritance, Aunt Mezi was extremely greedy. She did give me an education, but she also took over my inheritance. She had only one daughter, Wanjiku, who was a bit older than me, and she was determined I should marry Wanjiku. While I lived with my aunt, I fully believed I would marry Wanjiku and never looked at anyone else. But no matter how hard she tried, I never developed real feelings for Wanjiku. She just didn't attract me. She was older, overly obsessed with fashion, and not very educated. Still, if Aziza hadn't come into my life, I might have gone along with it. But once Aziza entered my life became sweet. Little by little, she took over my thoughts. I fell into the trap of her love, a captivity so enchanting that I wanted to remain in it forever. Wanjiku dreamed of becoming my bride, but I loved Aziza. I was determined to marry Aziza at any cost. Aziza came from a somewhat strict household. She told me her marriage had already been arranged to her cousin, but she loved me. She lived only with her mother and brother. I hid my relationship with Aziza for as long as I could, but when Aunt Mezi pushed for wedding preparations, I told her outright that I would not marry Wanjiku but would marry my classmate Aziza, whom I loved. The house erupted in uproar. Aunt Mezi had never expected me to go against her, but I stood by my decision. I would marry Aziza in any case. Aunt Mezi told me if I wanted to marry on my own terms, I should go ask for Aziza's hand myself. She would not help with any wedding expenses. It became a complicated step for me. Aziza's family was not ready for our marriage, and even if they agreed, I had no one to accompany me to arrange the match or accept responsibility on my behalf. I told Aziza about my predicament. She listened quietly. A few days later, she came to me in tears, saying her family was on the verge of marrying her to her cousin Ayo. "I cannot live without you. I will kill myself. I won't become anyone else's bride," she said. I felt the same. I had come to see her as my very life. After a lot of thought, we decided to have a court marriage. One night, with a well-thought-out plan, we put it into action. Our friend Juma supported us wholeheartedly. At the appointed time, we met and went to court, where we got married. Aziza and I then stayed at Juma's flat. Juma's father had gifted him this flat in the city, and he lived in the same neighborhood as us. We spent a few days there. In the bliss of uniting, we felt greater happiness than fear. I knew if Aziza's brother took any action, there would be no one to bail me out, and I did not know what they would do to Aziza. But after 10 or 15 days, nothing happened, and we felt more confident. I brought Aziza back home, but Aunt Mezi did not allow us inside, telling us to find our own place. So, I gathered what remained of my father's inheritance and bought a small home. Then I applied to work outside Africa for a bigger opportunity. Aziza and I spent a month of marriage together that was the most beautiful time of my life. Each day she spent with me, each night she fell asleep in my arms. Gazing into her lovely eyes, I saw entire landscapes of affection for me. Her voice was sweet as honey, making me delirious with love. Her wax-like body melted in my arms. She was a masterpiece from the Creator bestowed upon me, and I was reaping those blessings. Then Juma brought me news that my work visa had been approved. Hearing it made me sad, but Aziza reassured me, saying that life sometimes offers such opportunities. Soon we might have children, our needs would grow, and no one was around to help us. It was better for me to go and earn money. If I settled well, I could call her to join me, or I could come back and visit her every 6 months. We had about 5 days until my departure, and in those 5 days I spent every minute staring at her. She would laugh at my obsession, teasing, "Kato, you've really gone crazy now. And I would answer, "This isn't a joke, I truly have gone crazy." When the day came for me to leave, I devoted the whole night to showering love upon her, promising her I'd return in 6 months. Then I would try to take her back with me. I saw sadness in her eyes, but she still forced a smile. She came to drop me off at the airport, and then she left. I told Juma to watch out for her, and also to send his mother to check on her. I left, but I never felt at peace there. Every moment I was calling her, asking if she was safe. The nights felt endless, and the days felt suffocating. After 2 months, I was well settled at my new job. I started sending her money every month, enough to meet her needs. We even bought a lovely house and a car for her. Whenever I talked about coming back, she would suggest waiting a bit longer, so I could get even more established, and then come back only once but for a longer time, or bring her to me for good. I agreed, preferring not to upset her in any way. My aunt's side of the family cut ties with us, no longer visiting or calling. They were furious that I hadn't married Wanjiku, and on top of that, my earnings were benefiting someone else. Yet I was content, knowing that I had gained my true love. My aunt had indeed raised me, but she had also taken my inheritance, so whatever obligation she felt was repaid. A month later, Aziza told me she didn't like Juma visiting our house, and didn't want him dropping by when I wasn't there, because the neighbors would gossip. I understood and told Juma not to go over any more unless Aziza specifically asked. Juma agreed. Though it hurt me, considering what Juma had done for us, Aziza's concern was valid. People nowadays pounce on any chance to spread rumors. I was waiting for Aziza to say the word so I could come back, or at least spend a month or so with her before returning to my job. But she always said the same thing, stay there and focus on earning money. Once you have enough saved, then come back and take me with you. I would do whatever she wanted. Over 2 years, I saved a good amount of money. Aziza seemed very happy, fulfilling all the desires she once could not. I gave her complete freedom. I trusted her deeply. She was my wife, dearer to me than life itself. Then came the news that shook my world. Aziza had died. The one I couldn't even breathe without was now gone. How would I bear this entire world alone? I was also shocked that neither her mother nor her brother showed any concern after her death, just as they hadn't when she was alive. No one other than me seemed to care. That night, driven by my longing and my emotions, I did something that would cost me for the rest of my life. Now I think if only I had not gone to the cemetery that night, if only I had not dug up that grave. Such madness turned my life into a horrifying reality. That night, I held that shrouded body to my chest, showering it with kisses, pouring out my love. But when I pulled back the cloth from what was supposed to be Aziza's face, the ground slipped from beneath my feet. That was not Aziza, it was just a clay figure, expertly crafted and dressed in a burial shroud, placed in a coffin. I was so terrified that I instinctively threw it aside and just stared at it in shock. My first impulse was to run far away. Then curiosity took hold of me, and I checked it again, touching its face. It was rock hard, like stone. Confirming that it was just a lifeless figure, I wrapped it again in the shroud, returned it to the coffin, covered the grave with soil, and ran from the cemetery in terror, tripping and stumbling until I reached home. After shutting the gate behind me, I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. My mind was in chaos. I quickly turned off the lights, now frightened by the darkness I had once embraced. This was the first time in my life I was that scared, the first time fear consumed me. After a while, I entered my room, locked the door, swallowed 2 sleeping pills with water, fell onto the bed, and soon drifted into a deep slumber. The next day, I woke up in the late afternoon. My body felt calm, but as soon as my mind awakened, memories of the night came flooding back. I was overwhelmed, thinking, if I did dig up her grave, her corpse, even if decayed, should have been there. A human body doesn't turn into stone, it went against all logic and nature. Perhaps it was just a hallucination triggered by my extreme fear. My mind, however, insisted that I had seen it clearly. I was fully conscious at the time. I wasn't so scared as to be unable to perceive reality. I lay there the whole day, replaying everything over and over until my head ached. In the evening, there was a knock at my gate. I saw Juma outside. I opened the door, and as I was about to close it, I once again noticed Faraji in the street, staring at me. I didn't know why, but fury rose up in me. I went outside, ignoring Juma, and grabbed Faraji by the collar without respecting his age. Why do you keep staring at me? Tell me right now. He looked at me, astonished, and tried to free himself from my grasp. Before I could do anything else, Juma rushed forward, shouting, "Have you gone mad? Let him go." He pulled me away from Faraji, who was silent through it all, an older, serious man. Juma apologized on my behalf, then dragged me inside, sat me down on the sofa, handed me a glass of water, and asked what had gotten into me. As my anger subsided, Juma looked at me sympathetically and said, "I know what state you're in, but for God's sake, control yourself. You're still young, nobody can stand against the will of the Creator." I stayed quiet for a while, then told him the entire story of my midnight trip to the cemetery. Juma gazed at me in disbelief, tongue-tied. He could not believe I was capable of such an act. His shock was understandable, but I tried to draw his attention to the main point. Aziza's body wasn't there. It was just a clay figure. Why? Eventually, Juma said, "If you stay here stewing in your thoughts, you will go mad. Come with me for a while. Let's get out. You'll feel a bit fresher. Then we can think about it." My hunger was intense, so I agreed. We went out with the idea of getting food. But unconsciously, my steps led me to Faraji's house. I knocked. Juma seemed bewildered by my actions. First I assaulted this man, and now I was knocking on his door. Soon, Faraji opened the door. I apologized. He looked at me and smiled. "Come inside." Despite my reluctance, I entered with Juma. He led us to the living room, disappeared, then came back with a tray of juice and snacks. I felt awkward and ashamed. After a moment, Faraji spoke. "I can understand your situation. It's tragic, but I know some truths that you don't." I stared at him in astonishment. Then he told me the truth he knew, and it felt like the sky was falling on me all over again. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed his arm, dragged him into my car, and followed the path he directed, my mind whirling at the possibility that fate was playing a cruel trick on me. If this is a lie, I told myself, I'll kill Faraji. We drove in silence with Juma in the back seat, Faraji next to me. Eventually, Faraji told me to stop in front of a house. I braked, jumped out of the car, seized Faraji's hand, and marched inside, with Juma right behind me, obviously worried about me. The moment I entered the house, my world turned upside down. There, at a table, sat a man working on a laptop, and a woman stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder wearing revealing clothes. She straightened up as soon as I entered. It was Aziza. Right before my eyes. I rushed over to her, grabbed her arm, shook it in disbelief. "What is this?" "It's you. How can the dead come back to life?" She stared at me, shocked. Then she pulled her arm free and said coldly, "Yes, it's me. I don't want to be with you anymore. I realized that after marrying you, you don't have what I want. If you do have it, that means you must stay far away from me to earn it, and I have my physical needs. I'm in love with Ayo here. We staged this entire drama. I didn't want your neighbor or anyone to see me and spill the secret. But now that you do know, I'm not ashamed at all." The truth was laid bare. The woman for whom I had given my heart and soul had considered my feelings nothing more than a game. Even though she was legally my wife, she played her sick game. My Aunt Mezi and my cousin had supported her in this. Without Faraji spotting her on his rooftop, I might have spent a lifetime believing in Aziza, mourning the memory of a supposed dead wife. I quietly returned home with a heart full of betrayal. But it was no longer the sorrow that I had done her wrong or that I had lost her. It was the sorrow of being betrayed by someone you love with all your soul. As soon as I got home, I sent her divorce papers. A person may be in your life physically, but if they are unfaithful, it is better that they die in your eyes. For me, Aziza was dead. Anyone who commits betrayal should remember that life is like a circle. If you betray someone, sooner or later, you will be treated the same way. As they say, what goes around comes around. This story reminds us that loyalty and honesty are the true paths to beauty and success. This story serves as a stark reminder that betrayal destroys trust and breaks the strongest of bonds. However, it also teaches us to value honesty and loyalty above all else. A person who deceives others will inevitably face the consequences of their actions, for what we give to the world often returns to us in kind. True love is built on trust, and without it, even the most beautiful relationships crumble. O Allah, protect us from the pain of betrayal and guide us to remain loyal and truthful in all our relationships. Grant us the strength to endure heartbreak and the wisdom to let go of those who harm us. Friends, if this story touched your heart, share it with others and reflect on its lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and meaningful life lessons. May Allah guide us all. Ameen.